Deep within the endless green of the Amazon, a mother and her 10-year-old daughter vanished without a trace. What began as a simple family trip quickly turned into a nightmare. For 9 long weeks, the rainforest swallowed their presence, no footprints, no voices, no sign of life. Yet, when hope seemed to fade completely, the husband made a discovery that changed everything. Every step he took sank into the damp forest floor, every breath filled with the heavy air of despair. With his backpack pulling down on his shoulders and the weight of grief pressing even harder on his chest, he searched relentlessly. Locals whispered that the Amazon keeps its secrets well, and few who disappear inside ever return. 9 weeks had passed since Julia and her daughter Daphne vanished. But on one fateful day, deep in the jungle, the husband stumbled upon something that made his heart freeze. And what he found raises a question that still lingers. What really happened to the mother and child in the heart of the world's most mysterious rainforest? Julia Hart was 38 years old, a woman known by her friends as gentle, thoughtful, and endlessly patient. She worked as a school librarian, a place where her love for books and her love for quiet spaces found a natural home. Julia lived a life that seemed simple, but behind her calm smile was a deep desire to see the world, to travel beyond the small borders of her daily routine. For years, she had dreamed of stepping into the Amazon, that vast green sea of life, where every sound and shadow seemed alive with mystery. Her daughter, Daphne, only 10 years old, was her constant companion. Bright, curious, and full of questions, Daphne carried a small notebook everywhere she went, sketching leaves, writing little poems, and collecting the kind of details that only a child's eyes could catch. She adored animals, especially birds, and often begged her mother to take her on adventures beyond their hometown. To Julia, this trip was more than a vacation. It was a promise to her daughter, a chance to show Daphne the wonders of the world before life grew heavier with years. Their husband and father, Jordan Hart, had always been the steady one in the family. He worked long hours as an engineer, providing stability and structure, while Julia filled their home with warmth and Daphne with laughter. Jordan knew the Amazon was no easy place, but when Julia spoke of it, her eyes lit up, and he could not deny her. Together, they planned what was supposed to be a 2-week journey, a family adventure that would take them through one of Earth's most untamed landscapes. The Hart family flew first to Bogota, then to a small city near the Colombian border, where the jungles seemed to press closer with each mile. From there, a local guide helped them prepare mosquito nets, heavy boots, waterproof packs, and the constant warning, "Respect the forest, for it does not forgive mistakes." To Julia, the warnings only deepened the sense of awe. She imagined herself walking under towering trees, hearing the songs of unseen birds, with Daphne at her side, hand in hand. On their first few days, everything went as planned. They trekked short distances, marveled at the endless green, and took photographs that now remain frozen in time. Julia laughed as Daphne pointed at colorful butterflies, chasing them until her shoes were muddy, her cheeks flushed. Jordan carried the heavier loads, often trailing behind, but he never complained. At night, they camped near rivers, where the sound of water blended with the calls of the jungle, creating a lullaby, both beautiful and unsettling. Yet, even in those early moments, there was a feeling, faint but undeniable, that the forest was watching. Locals often said, "The Amazon chooses who leaves and who stays." To Julia, it was just a saying, a bit of folklore. To Jordan, it was something he dismissed with a tired smile. But the truth was, the rainforest was not a place of comfort. It was alive, unpredictable, and it was about to turn a family's dream into a nightmare. The morning of their disappearance began like so many others in the jungle, thick mist rising from the trees, air heavy with the smell of wet earth, and the endless chorus of insects humming in the background. Julia woke early, her hair still damp from the humidity, and helped Daphne pack a small satchel with her sketchbook, a water bottle, and a snack wrapped in cloth. It was meant to be a short walk, Nothing more than a simple exploration near their campsite, a chance for mother and daughter to wander ahead while Jordan reorganized supplies. Jordan remembered the way Julia smiled that morning, the way Daphne tugged at her mother's hand, eager to see something new. They promised to be back before midday. The jungle was vast, yes, but they had walked smaller trails before, always returning with stories of birds, bright flowers, or curious insects. Jordan watched them disappear behind the curtain of leaves, never imagining that this would be the last moment he would see them, as they had always been, together, alive, full of life. Hours passed. The sun rose higher, burning away the mist, and still Julia and Daphne had not returned. At first, Jordan told himself they had gone a little farther, maybe lost track of time while sketching or following a path. But as the heat of the afternoon pressed down and the forest fell strangely quiet, worry began to crawl into his chest. By late afternoon, panic replaced patience. He called their names, his voice echoing through the trees, swallowed quickly by the endless green. No answer came back, only the sound of branches shifting, as if something unseen moved just beyond sight. Jordan grabbed his machete and pushed into the undergrowth, retracing what he thought might be their steps. He found nothing, no footprints in the damp soil, no snapped twigs, no dropped belongings. It was as if Julia and Daphne had been erased from the jungle. As night approached, the forest grew darker and far more threatening. Jordan lit a small fire near camp, calling their names into the darkness until his voice broke. The jungle answered only with the cries of distant animals. That first night was endless, filled with the torment of waiting, straining to hear footsteps that never came, whispering prayers into the firelight, begging for a miracle. The next morning, Jordan sought help. A nearby village sent men with him into the jungle, each carrying machetes, ropes, and flashlights. They combed the trails, shouting, leaving markers, trying to track the mother and child, but the forest seemed to resist. Rain fell suddenly, washing away any faint signs. The ground turned slick, sucking at boots, making every step harder. For days, search parties moved in widening circles, but the jungle offered no clues, no trace of Julia or Daphne. Witnesses remembered small things: Julia laughing in the market days earlier, buying fruit for Daphne, the little girl clutching her notebook tightly as though it were treasure. Those memories became the last anchors for people trying to understand how both could vanish so completely. The local police became involved, followed by military patrols. Still, nothing. The forest devoured resources, time, and hope. Rumors began to spread. Perhaps they had stumbled into a dangerous part of the jungle. Perhaps they had crossed paths with someone who did not want to be found. Yet the most haunting possibility was the simplest: that the Amazon itself had taken them, swallowed them whole, leaving nothing for the living to find. 9 weeks would pass before Jordan discovered something deep in the jungle that shattered the silence of their disappearance. But on that first day, and in the long nights that followed, it was only the mystery, the cruel absence that filled the air, hanging heavy over every search, every desperate call, every tear shed under the suffocating canopy of green. The search for Julia and Daphne quickly grew into something larger than Jordan could have imagined. What began with a handful of villagers carrying flashlights and machetes turned into an organized effort involving police, forest rangers, and even volunteers who traveled from neighboring towns. Each day, new faces appeared, each one hopeful, carrying ropes, radios, and packs of food. The Amazon, however, offered no kindness. Jordan walked with them, day after day, his boots sinking into mud, his skin raw from insect bites, his throat hoarse from calling out the names of his wife and daughter. He refused to stay behind, even when officials suggested he rest. "If I don't walk with you," he told them, "then I might miss the moment they need me." His voice cracked when he said it, but no one argued with him again. The search parties spread in wide arcs, cutting paths through dense walls of vegetation, marking trees with strips of cloth so they would not lose themselves in the green labyrinth. Dogs were brought in, noses pressed to the ground, but the thick, wet air confused their senses. Helicopters circled above at times, their blades thundering over the canopy, but from that high up, the forest looked like an endless carpet, unbroken, swallowing everything beneath it. On the 5th day, one of the searchers called out. The group hurried to him, their hearts racing. There, on the side of a large tree, was a mark, a clean cut, straight, and deliberate. Jordan's breath caught. Julia carried a small knife, one she often used to cut fruit or clear brush for Daphne. Could it have been hers? The cut was fresh, the bark still damp from the wound. For a moment hope surged in Jordan's chest. He pressed his hand against the tree, whispering his wife's name. The searchers marked the spot and pushed deeper in the direction the cut seemed to point. Hours passed, sweat dripping into their eyes, but no further sign appeared. The forest seemed to mock them with silence, as if it had offered one small clue only to take it back again. That night, Jordan lay awake by the campfire, staring into the flames, replaying the image of that tree over and over. He imagined Julia carving it, Daphne beside her, frightened but alive. That vision was the only thing keeping him moving. As the days stretched into weeks, the weight of failure grew heavier. Supplies dwindled, tempers flared, and exhaustion carved lines into every face. Some of the villagers muttered about spirits, old legends of travelers who vanished because the jungle itself demanded offerings. Jordan refused to listen, yet the whispers reached him in the dark, feeding the doubt already growing inside him. One evening, heavy rain poured down without warning, flooding the ground, washing away footprints, scattering fragile clues. When the storm passed, the forest was cleaner, quieter, as if it had wiped away every trace of Julia and Daphne. The despair among the searchers was palpable. One by one, some of the volunteers began to leave, their belief broken. But Jordan stayed. He could not leave, not when the memory of that knife-cut tree still burned in his mind. Every morning, he returned to it, touching the bark as if it could speak to him, as if Julia's hand lingered there still. He began carving his own marks on nearby trees, hoping she might see them if she was alive, and searching for a way back. But each day ended the same. No voices, no movement, only the vast green silence pressing closer. By the 4th week, officials began to scale back. They told Jordan the chances of survival in the jungle, after so many days, were nearly impossible. He listened, but inside, he raged. "You don't know her," he whispered. "You don't know my daughter." And so he kept walking, sometimes alone, sometimes with 1 or 2 locals who refused to abandon him. The jungle seemed endless, but so was his grief. Each rustle of leaves made his heart leap. Each broken branch became a possibility. And though hope was thinning with every passing day, that single cut on the tree, sharp and deliberate, remained like a message he could not ignore. Somewhere, somehow, he believed Julia and Daphne were still out there, waiting to be found. When the official search teams began to pull away, Jordan remained, unwilling to let the jungle close its mouth over his wife and daughter. For the first time in weeks, the noise of helicopters and radios faded, leaving only the endless hum of insects and the rustling of unseen animals in the canopy above. The silence was unbearable, not because it was quiet, but because it was final. It carried the weight of resignation, as if the world itself had decided to move on, while he was left behind. Each day, Jordan rose before dawn, his body aching, his clothes damp from the endless humidity. He carried his machete, his canteen, and the memory of Julia's smile, of Daphne's laughter, as his only compass. He would walk as far as he could, marking trees with small cuts, calling their names into the shadows. Every evening, he returned to camp with nothing but exhaustion and mosquito bites, yet he refused to stop. Nights were worse. The fire he built seemed too small, a fragile circle of light surrounded by an ocean of darkness. Sometimes he swore he heard voices, Julia's soft tone, Daphne's giggle, but when he turned, there was only the forest, swaying and whispering. Sleep came in fragments, broken by nightmares. He saw Julia reaching for him through branches, Daphne crying out his name, always just out of reach. He woke drenched in sweat, clutching the earth as if it could anchor him to reality. Messages from home arrived through occasional phone calls with his family. Julia's parents begged him to return, saying he had done all he could. Daphne's school friend sent drawings, hoping she would see them one day. But Jordan could not leave. To leave was to admit defeat, to accept that the jungle had taken everything. As long as I am here, he told himself, there is still a chance. The villagers who had once joined him now watched from a distance, their expressions heavy with pity. A few came to share food, to sit by his fire in silence, but most believed the forest had already claimed Julia and Daphne. They had seen it before hunters who disappeared, travelers who never returned. For them, it was not unusual, but for Jordan, it was unbearable. Weeks dragged into the second month. His beard grew thick, his body thin, but his determination hardened. He began to wander farther, risking deeper paths. He walked along rivers where crocodiles slipped beneath the surface. He climbed ridges where the canopy stretched unbroken for miles. At times, the jungle seemed alive with menace, as if it wanted to break him. And still, he pressed on. There were moments, small and fleeting, when hope flared again. A broken branch that seemed too fresh. A shape in the mud that might have been a footprint. A sound in the distance that carried like laughter. But each time he followed, the trail dissolved, leaving him more lost, more desperate. The memory of the cut tree haunted him most of all. Sharp, deliberate, undeniable. He returned to it again and again, touching the wound in the bark as though it were a lifeline. By the 7th week, Jordan's mind began to blur between reality and memory. He spoke to Julia as if she were beside him, telling her about the day's search, promising her he would not give up. He carried Daphne's small sketchbook, which he had found among their belongings in the camp before they vanished, tucked safely against his chest. At night, he flipped through her drawings, birds, flowers, little shapes of the forest, clinging to them as if they were proof that she had been real, that she was still somewhere waiting. The days blended together. A rhythm of searching, waiting, despairing, and starting again. Jordan's heart lived in the space between hope and grief, refusing to settle on either. For him, the jungle was no longer just trees and rivers. It was a cage, holding the answers he needed, but never giving them up. And then, in the 9th week, something changed. On a morning heavy with mist, Jordan walked farther than before, deeper into the green. His body was failing, but his will pushed him forward. And in that hidden part of the forest, he stumbled upon something that made his heart stop, something that would shatter the endless cycle of searching and waiting. It was on the 63rd day, when the jungle felt heavier than ever, that Jordan's search finally led him to something he could neither deny nor forget. The morning mist clung low, wrapping the trees in pale veils, muffling every sound. His body trembled from hunger, his steps dragged from exhaustion, yet his heart urged him deeper, whispering that he had to keep moving, that somewhere ahead lay the truth. The forest grew darker as he pressed on, branches twisting like arms above him, roots snaking across the ground. Then, through a gap in the thick foliage, he saw it, a structure, faint, nearly swallowed by vines and decay. His breath caught. A cabin, or what remained of one, hidden so far inside the Amazon that no map he had studied had ever marked it. The roof sagged, wood splintered, the doorway leaning, as if it had fought too long against the jungle's weight. Jordan approached slowly, his heart pounding. Each step echoed in his ears. He had searched for weeks, clinging to fragments of hope, and now this ruin stood before him like a monument waiting to reveal a secret. He pushed aside the vines, their leaves wet against his skin, and stepped into the darkness. Inside, the air was damp, heavy with rot. Light filtered through holes in the roof, cutting pale beams across the floor. At first, all he saw were broken planks, rusted tools, and scraps of cloth, long forgotten. But then, in the corner, something caught his eye. A torn backpack, faded and stained. His knees weakened. He recognized it instantly. It was Daphne's. The same small pack she carried every day of the trip, the one she had stuffed with pencils and her beloved notebook. Jordan dropped to the floor, pulling it into his arms. His hands shook as he opened it. Inside, water-damaged pages stuck together, but some drawings remained: birds with long tails, flowers with curling petals, sketches made by a little girl who had once sat laughing under the trees. The sight broke him. He pressed the damp notebook to his chest, tears cutting through the dirt on his face. But the discovery did not end there. Just beyond the pack, leaning against the far wall, was a piece of fabric, torn, frayed, but familiar. Julia's scarf. The same one she had wrapped around her shoulders on cool mornings. He picked it up gently, as if it were fragile glass, his breath shallow, his vision swimming. She had been here. They both had. The realization sent a chill through him. They had reached this place. They had stood inside these walls. But why? And what had happened after? His eyes scanned the room again, desperate for more. On one of the wooden beams, faint but clear, he saw scratches. Not random, not caused by animals, but deliberate lines carved by hand. He traced them with his fingers, feeling the grooves. Were they marks of time past, or a silent cry for help left behind? The jungle pressed in through the broken walls, as if trying to reclaim the cabin, to bury what it had once sheltered. Jordan stood there, surrounded by relics of his family, torn between despair and the faintest glimmer of truth. He had proof. Now they had survived for some time. After vanishing, they had made it here. But the silence in the cabin, the emptiness where voices should have been, told him something darker too. As he stepped back into the light, clutching the backpack and the scarf, the weight of the discovery settled into his chest. For 9 weeks, he had lived between hope and loss. Now he held the evidence of both. Julia and Daphne had been alive long enough to leave these traces, but what had become of them afterward remained swallowed by the forest. The cabin stood silent behind him, its shadows heavy with unanswered questions. Jordan knew he had found something, but he also knew it was only the beginning of a deeper, more haunting mystery, one that would never let him rest. When the shocking discovery spread beyond the jungle, theories began to bloom like vines wrapping around the truth, each one darker and more unsettling than the last. Some whispered that Julia and Daphne had been lured deeper into the rainforest by someone they trusted, a local guide perhaps, or a stranger who had been watching them from the Synchros. Shadows. The Amazon is vast, but it is not empty, and the silence between the trees often hides more than just wildlife. Could they have stumbled upon something, or someone, they were never meant to see? Others believed the jungle itself had claimed them. This theory, while less human, carried a haunting weight. The carved markings on the tree that Jordan found weeks earlier were not random scratches. To some, they seemed like a desperate message, an attempt by Julia to leave a trace behind. But if she was able to mark the trees, why did she not carve more? Why did the messages stop so suddenly? Perhaps exhaustion, or perhaps something cut her attempts short. Another theory grew darker still, that they had been taken not by the forest, but by people who used its endless green maze as a cover. Tales of illegal groups moving silently through the Amazon, loggers, traffickers. Even hidden camps gave rise to the belief that Julia and Daphne might have crossed paths with those who would not allow witnesses to walk away. If true, the horror of their final days may never be fully known. And then there were those who clung to something more unexplainable, something that lingers in the folklore of the Amazon. Old myths speak of spirits that guard the forest, of lost souls wandering among the trees, of those who vanish, as if the jungle itself swallows them whole. Rational minds dismiss these as stories, but for some, the eerie placement of their remains, back to back in a place where no trail should lead, seemed almost ritualistic. Each theory carried its own weight, its own pain. For Jordan, none could ease the crushing silence left behind in his home. He replayed every moment, every choice. Should they have taken another trail? Should he have insisted on staying closer together? Should he have noticed the danger sooner? These questions haunted him more than any theory. In the end, The Amazon kept its secrets. Julia and Daphne's story became one more thread in the tapestry of the unexplained, a reminder that even in the modern world, there are still places that can swallow lives whole, leaving behind only whispers and scars carved into the bark of forgotten trees. In the end, no theory could erase the truth that lingered in Jordan's heart. Julia and Daphne were gone, taken in a way that left more questions than answers, more shadows than light. The cabin where their remains were found became a symbol of both horror and sorrow, a silent tomb in the middle of the Amazon, standing as a cruel reminder that sometimes the world does not give us closure. For those who followed the story, it was not just about a mother and daughter vanishing. It was about how fragile our time together truly is, how quickly the people we love can slip away. Julia had been gentle, thoughtful, always looking for wonder even in the smallest corners of life. Daphne had been bright, curious, filling her little notebooks with sketches of the birds she loved so much. Their bond, mother and daughter, was inseparable. Perhaps that is why they were found the way they were back to back, even in death, refusing to be parted by the darkness that claimed them. Jordan carried that image with him. He carried the silence of 9 weeks of searching, the sleepless nights, the sound of his own voice calling out their names into an uncaring jungle. And he carried the knowledge that love is not always enough to protect those dearest to us. Yet love is what kept him alive, what drove him to keep searching, what allowed him to find them so they would not remain lost forever. And so, the story of Julia and Daphne is not only a mystery, it is a warning and a reminder. The world is beautiful, but it is also dangerous. The people we hold closest are more precious than we often realize, and in the quiet moments when life feels ordinary, it is worth remembering that nothing is guaranteed. As you hear their story, let it not be only a tale of tragedy. Let it be a call to cherish your loved ones, to hold them close, to never delay the words you wish to say. Because in the end, we are all just passing through, and what remains is not the mystery of how we vanish, but the love we leave behind.